She followed her horse one morning. What she found shocked everybody. The first thing Grace Ellison noticed when she stepped out into the dawn was the silence. Not the usual hush of dew and distant birdsong. This was a hollow stillness, the kind that pressed against her skin like the air had forgotten how to move. No snorting from the horses. No lazy whinny from Willow, the black mare who usually greeted her at the gate. Grace frowned and stepped off the porch barefoot, her nightdress brushing the tops of her calves. The boards creaked beneath her toes. But even that sound felt wrong, too sharp in the hush. The paddock gate was open. Her heart gave a quiet lurch. She hadn't left it that way. A quick glance across the field confirmed it, empty. No horses, no movement. Just trampled grass and one thing more, hoof prints, fresh, leading straight past the fence line. The one her father had warned her about since she was a little girl. She ran, not even thinking, just ran, nightgown tangling at her knees, hair loose behind her. The fog had crept in like it was waiting for her, thick and silver, curling around fence posts and climbing the orchard trees like it had fingers. Willow's tracks were easy to follow, deep, determined, and alone. She didn't run like a horse in panic. She ran with purpose. Grace ducked under the barbed strand and into the line of poplars that marked the beginning of what folks in town called the Old Woods. No one ever went in there, or if they did, they didn't speak of what they saw. But Grace didn't care. Willow was the only horse she ever truly loved. She had tamed her herself without her father's help, found her wandering one spring morning with a scar down her shoulder and eyes that knew too much. She wasn't about to let her go. A branch scraped her arm as she passed into the trees, but she barely felt it. The world had narrowed down to hoofprints and breath. For 20 minutes, all she could hear was the soft patter of her feet on damp leaves, the birds beginning to wake above. Then came the creek, the sound of water trickling over rocks. The prints led straight toward it. She slowed, heart thudding. A new sound emerged now, a snort, then a splash, and then voices. Her breath caught. Low, male. Just beyond the brush, Grace crept closer, crouching low. Through the trees, a clearing opened like a held breath. The fog was lifting slowly, revealing a man kneeling beside the black mare, Willow. Her breath left her chest like it had been punched out. There she was, calm, standing perfectly still as if waiting. The man beside her was shirtless, rinsing a strip of cloth in the creek. His back was marked by old scars, the kind made by whips or something worse. He had long dark hair tied loosely behind his head and strong arms that moved with careful grace. Willow didn't move when he pressed the cloth to her leg, as if she knew him, as if she trusted him. Grace stepped forward without realizing it, a twig snapping beneath her foot. The man spun. They locked eyes. He froze. She didn't speak, didn't breathe. He stood slowly, the cloth still in one hand. His face was angular, sun-worn, with piercing ice-blue eyes that didn't blink. "What are you doing here?" he asked. His voice wasn't angry, just quiet. Waited. Grace opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Then, "She's mine." He looked at Willow. The mare blinked once but didn't move. "She came back," he said softly. Grace took a step forward. "Back?" He nodded once. "She was born here. This is where she was meant to return." Grace glanced down at the hoofprints behind her, then at the man, then at Willow. Something deep in her chest shifted. "She led me here," she whispered. The man looked at her again. Longer this time. His gaze lingered like he was trying to decide whether she was real. "Then you'd best listen to what she wants," he said. "Because this place, it doesn't call folks by accident." Grace felt the hair on her arms rise. She had 1,000 questions: who he was, what he meant. But all she could do was stare as he turned away and walked toward the trees beyond the clearing, leaving Willow behind. Grace stepped closer to her mare, trembling slightly. The black horse didn't flinch, didn't bolt, just looked back at her with eyes full of knowing. And Grace knew then, whatever she'd just walked into, she wouldn't be the same again. 2 days earlier, Grace Ellison stood barefoot on the back porch, brushing down the coat of a barn cat while her father hammered nails into the south fence. The heat had been rising since sunrise, the kind of pressing warmth that made the soil smell rich and the air hum with insects. Grace didn't mind it. She liked the earth under her feet. She liked the feel of morning before anyone else in the house stirred. Except it wasn't much of a house anymore. Not really. Just a gray-framed farmhouse on 22 acres of tired land, 3 milk cows, a couple of hens, and a father whose voice grew shorter with each year that passed. "Feed's late," Edgar Ellison muttered as he jammed another nail into a cracked board. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing forearms thick from years of fence work and hard winters. "Town boys are getting lazy." Grace didn't reply. She knew better. Her father didn't expect answers, just silence to fill the space where her mother used to speak. He wiped sweat from his forehead and turned to her. "Don't forget to check the salt lick. Deer been sniffing too close again." "I'll take care of it," she said softly. Edgar narrowed his eyes. "Don't go past the fence." She paused. "Not even blinking. You hear me, Grace?" "I hear you." He nodded, but didn't look satisfied. Just went back to hammering like the sound might cover something inside him that threatened to rise. Inside, the house was a shrine to function. Her mother's piano still sat in the parlor, but it hadn't been played since the funeral 3 winters back. Dust rested lightly on the keys like memory. Grace carried a pail of oats to the barn and whispered good morning to each stall, her words soft and habitual. Willow waited at the end. The black mare lifted her head when Grace approached, eyes gentle. There was something ancient in that look. Not old, not tired, just deep. As if she held history in her bones. "You feel it too, don't you?" Grace whispered, stroking her muzzle. "This place ain't big enough for dreams." She had found Willow almost a year ago. It was the last week of March, and spring had barely touched the fields. The morning fog had rolled in heavy, and Grace had gone walking without telling anyone, just wandered past the fence, heart hammering with something she didn't yet have words for. That's when she saw her. The mare had been standing alone near the dried-up stream bed, a figure carved from shadow, mane tangled with burrs, flank marked by a pale scar like a crescent moon. At first, Grace thought she was wild, but when she stepped closer, the horse didn't move, just stared. And when Grace whispered, "You lost too," the mare lowered her head. She had brought Willow home without a word. No one asked where she came from. Her father didn't want to know. The only condition he gave was simple: "She's yours to keep, long as you keep her on our side of the fence." Grace obeyed, or tried to. She built trust slowly, brushing her coat every morning, feeding by hand, sitting in the stall late into the night just reading aloud from her mother's old books, poems, stories, whispers meant for someone to hear. And once as summer crept in, she noticed a figure in the woods beyond the north field. A man. He stood there like a ghost, half hidden among poplars, watching. Grace's breath had caught, but Willow didn't spook. She lifted her head, nickered once, and the man turned and vanished. Since then, Grace hadn't spoken of it. Not even to the cat. But at night, she would sometimes sit on the porch and stare toward the trees, wondering if she'd imagined him, or worse, if she hadn't. The townsfolk didn't speak kindly of strangers, especially not half-Comanche ones. When she was small, they used to tell tales in the general store about men in the hills, survivors from the blood years, savages with wolf eyes, one old farmer called them, watching from shadows, waiting to take what's left. Grace had always listened silently, her hands in her lap, eyes down. But even then, something about the stories didn't feel right. They felt unfinished, like someone had written the last page too soon. The day before Willow vanished, Grace had walked her usual trail past the orchard, picking thistles and turning them into shapes, woven crowns of thorny green. She sat under the old sycamore by her mother's grave and placed a crown at its base. "Sorry I never leave flowers," she murmured, "but I figure these don't lie." She closed her eyes and pressed a palm to the soil. It felt warm, alive, and that's when she heard it, the soft snort from the orchard. Willow. But not alone. When Grace stood, she saw the mare standing still as bone. And beside her, a figure, shrouded, barely visible, just enough light to see the outline of a man. Tall, strong posture, stillness like carved wood. She didn't run this time, but when she stepped toward them, he was gone, vanished again. Willow stayed behind, eyes fixed on her like nothing was amiss. That night, Grace lay awake in bed, the moonlight silvering her ceiling. She thought about her father's silence, about the scar on Willow's side, about the man who never said a word, and most of all she thought about the way the horse always looked at the woods, not in fear but longing, like something was calling, or waiting. She rose at dawn the next morning, pulled on her boots, and slipped outside before the rooster crowed. But the stall was empty. Willow was gone. The gate creaked softly in the wind, and fresh hoofprints pressed deep into the dirt, right past the fence line, into the unknown. Grace sat in the hayloft with dust in her lashes and her arms around her knees. The barn was still, filled with late morning heat, and the scent of old grain and oiled leather. From here she could see the empty stall where Willow used to rest her head on the gate like she was waiting for someone to open it and say, "Let's go." Now there was nothing but silence and stale straw. The ache in Grace's chest had grown heavier since that morning. She hadn't told her father. She'd said Willow got spooked, maybe slipped through a loose panel. He muttered something about worthless stock, and poured another tin cup of coffee, never looking up. That was the thing with Edgar Ellison. He'd rather be blind than bothered. At 19, Grace had never kissed anyone. She'd never been farther than the church in Dustbriar, and she'd never spent more than a half day without her father's shadow trailing her like a warning. The girls in town called her sweet but strange. One shopkeeper once whispered she had those quiet eyes that make you wonder what they see. She never asked for gossip, but it found her anyway. She was the daughter of the man who never smiled, the girl who kept to herself and trained a scarred black mare like it was her only friend. And in truth, that wasn't far off. Every time she reached past the fence with her feet, her thoughts, her questions, someone tugged her back, usually with guilt, sometimes with cold hands. Her father had taught her 3 things. Don't cry in front of men. Don't speak unless asked. Don't trust what you don't understand. She had obeyed those rules for years. But Willow had changed something in her. And now that the mare was gone, something inside Grace felt wild and loose, like a rope that had snapped mid-tension. That afternoon, while the sun made ghosts of the fence posts, Grace stood by the water trough and stared at the sky. The clouds moved like they were chasing each other, west to east, faster than usual. Behind her, the wind rustled the dried corn stalks. It felt like a whisper brushing her neck. She shivered. The scar she'd noticed on Willow, shaped like a crescent, had looked oddly familiar, like a brand, but not one from her father's iron. She once found a page in her mother's sketchbook, buried beneath linens in an old chest. It showed a horse with that exact scar, but it was dated years before Willow had even been born. She hadn't dared show her father, and when she brought it up once, lightly, asking about the mark, he had gone still. "Where'd you see that?" he asked flatly. "Nowhere." She had lied. His jaw tightened. "Then keep it that way." Grace climbed to the roof that evening. It was her favorite secret, an old lattice by the side porch, just sturdy enough to hold her weight. From the roof she could see beyond the fields, past the orchard, to the woods. That line of trees stood like silent judges, casting long shadows toward the barn. Somewhere beyond them was him, the man she saw in the clearing. She still didn't know who he was, just that Willow trusted him. And trust from a horse doesn't come easy. He had a scar on his side, a deep one, rib to hip. He moved with a slight stiffness, like he'd been hurt bad and healed crooked. But his hands were gentle. The way he touched Willow was like prayer. He hadn't run from Grace. He'd looked her dead in the eyes and asked, "Why did you follow her?" "Because I had to," she'd wanted to say. "Because something's wrong, and nobody will say it out loud. Because I feel like there's a world bigger than the one inside these damn fences, and it's calling me by name." But all she'd said was, "She's mine." She hated how small it sounded now. Her mother used to call her my wild flower, said she had a quiet bloom, a stubborn root, a bend but don't break soul. Grace liked that, but since her mother died, no one called her anything at all. The next morning, Grace dressed before the sun rose. Simple cotton blouse, work trousers under her skirt, boots laced tight. She didn't pack food, just a water skin, a pocket knife, and the leather cord her mother once braided for her with a single turquoise bead in the middle. She wore it on her wrist now, like armor. She slipped out while the roosters still slept. No one saw her cross the fence. She followed the trail again, where hoofprints had begun 2 days earlier, now fading but still there if you knew how to see. By the time the sun crested the treetops, she found the clearing again. Empty. No man, no mare. But signs remained. Ash from a campfire, pressed grass from where someone had slept, a feather braided into a rope hanging from a low branch, and a note. Just a torn scrap of leather with one word etched into it by blade. Come. Grace didn't know what that meant, or where it would lead, but she pressed her hand to the mark and closed her eyes. The silence wasn't so silent anymore. The wind moved differently here, like it carried memory or promise. She whispered aloud, "What am I doing?" The trees didn't answer, but neither did they laugh. That night she dreamed of hoofbeats and smoke and blue eyes watching her from beneath the moon. The next time Grace stepped into the woods, the sun was still climbing. The morning light filtered down in thin golden spears through the canopy, making the air shimmer like water. Her boots left soft impressions in the underbrush as she followed no trail, just instinct and a pull in her chest that felt like hunger, like homesickness for something she'd never had. She passed the spot where she first saw him, Austin Fisher, though she didn't know his name yet, and slowed. The clearing had changed. It wasn't empty now. He was there again. Austin. He was shirted this time, sitting on a flat rock, carving something into a piece of driftwood with a small bone-handled knife, a slow, deliberate motion. He didn't look up when she stepped into the light, though she knew he heard her. "I figured you might come back," he said without turning. Grace swallowed. "You left a message." His hand paused. "Didn't write it for just anyone." She stepped closer, the dried leaves beneath her boots crackling. "Then who was it for?" He finally looked up. His face was calm, but not empty. Alert, steady. His eyes were a pale, icy blue that seemed out of place in such a warm, earthy place. She couldn't tell if they were kind or just honest. "For the one who followed the horse," he said. "Not many would. I'm not most folks." He smirked. Just a flicker at the corner of his mouth. "No, I reckon you're not." They sat in silence for a while, the way strangers sometimes do, when there's something unspoken, but not yet earned. Grace sat on a nearby stump, brushing twigs from her skirt, feeling awkward in her own skin for the first time in a while. He offered her a piece of dried venison from a pouch. She took it without a word. He chewed slowly, then asked, "You got a name?" "Grace." "That's a good name. What's yours?" He paused for a beat. Then, "Austin." "Just Austin?" He glanced at her, and there was something sad in the way he said, "Austin Fisher, if it matters." "But most folks don't bother asking." "I'm not most folks," she repeated. "No," he said, "you sure ain't." She watched as he stood and walked over to Willow, who had returned to the clearing some time before Grace had arrived. The mare grazed near the stream, peaceful and unbothered. "She came back to you," Grace said. "She comes and goes, like she's got her own reasons. But I think she's always known who she was really meant for." Grace stepped closer. "You raised her?" He shook his head. "No, I found her. Same as you. Years ago. She was injured. Took a while to earn her trust. But she never really belonged to anyone. She let me ride her. She don't let people do anything unless she wants to. So maybe she saw something in you." He looked at her then, longer this time. The kind of look that peeled past the surface. Not the way men in town stared at her when they thought she wasn't watching. This was different. Like he saw her confusion, her restlessness, and didn't try to fix it, just let it be real. Grace flushed and looked away. "Why are you living out here?" "Better question," he said. "Why aren't you?" She blinked. "What?" He shrugged. "You don't talk like someone who belongs in that little town down the road. Don't carry yourself like them, neither." Grace bit her lip. "My father wouldn't." "Yeah," he said. "I figured there'd be a father in this story." There was no mockery in his voice, just understanding. She lowered her voice. "He doesn't like outsiders. Outsiders like me." She nodded. He looked at the horizon. "Well, I don't much like fences." The conversation shifted like weather. Small questions filled the space. She learned that Austin had once been a farrier's apprentice, before the war took his father and the town turned cold on his family name. He didn't speak about his mother, or the scar on his side. Grace didn't ask. Not yet. They talked until the sun dipped behind the trees. When Grace stood to leave, she felt it in her chest like a tether pulling taut. He looked at her and said, "You can come back if you want." She nodded. "I think I will." He tipped his head. "Then I'll be here." She didn't ask how he knew, but somehow she believed him. The next day, she returned with bread wrapped in linen and an old apple from the cellar. They ate in silence, seated near the stream. Austin showed her how to braid strips of hide into cord. She told him about the time she tried to tame a wild rooster and ended up with a bite on her thigh that lasted a week. He laughed. Not loud, just enough to make her heart flutter like a bird against the cage of her ribs. By the fourth visit, he brought out a charcoal stick and began sketching on a piece of bark. She raised a brow. "You draw?" "Sometimes. Only when something won't get out of my head." He turned the bark toward her. It was her face. Not perfect, but true. Eyes like open sky. Hair windswept. A touch of wild around the edges. Grace didn't speak for a long while. Then she said, "No one's ever drawn me before. I doubt they ever saw you write." The next day he touched her hand by accident. Just a graze as they passed the pouch between them. She froze. He pulled back fast, almost like it burned him. "Sorry." "It's okay," she said, but her fingers still tingled long after the contact. And her thoughts were tangled all the way home. Then came the sixth visit. Grace brought one of her mother's books. Poems by a woman named Dickinson. She sat on the moss beside Austin and read aloud, her voice trembling slightly, unsure, but he listened. Really listened. Not just to the words, but the way she said them. Like they mattered. Like she mattered. When she closed the book, he said quietly, "You're different than anyone I've ever met." She looked at the fire, not him. "You say that like it's a good thing." "It is." And for a moment, nothing in the world existed but that firelight, the rustle of trees, and the slow, steady breath of two people who'd been alone too long. The trouble began with a wagon. Not one she saw, one she heard. Grace was walking back from the clearing just past noon. Sunlight dappled through the trees. The sound of Austin's voice still echoing in her chest from something he'd said. Some folks don't lie with words. They lie by staying quiet. She hadn't known what to make of it at the time. But now, as the crunch of wagon wheels broke the quiet near the edge of the farm road, her feet stilled. The voice that followed was unmistakable. Marshall Clay Dunning. "Don't worry yourself, Edgar. If he's out here, I'll sniff him out." Grace ducked behind a low pine trunk, heart pounding. "He's out here," her father muttered. "Been feeling it. Found strange footprints near the northern fence. Deer don't walk like that. And there's been missing chickens." "Could be foxes," the marshal replied. "Foxes don't leave charcoal in tree hollows." The wagon creaked to a stop. The marshal sighed. "You sure it's him?" There was a long pause. Then her father said, "You remember the old raid? The burned barn up near Black Hollow? Don't remind me. That boy's from that bloodline. He's one of them." Fesher? Half-blood, from his mother's side. His father's people were traders. His mother was Comanche. Grace felt the world tip beneath her boots. That night she said nothing at supper. Her father chewed roast pork, with the same silence he always wore. The ticking of the old wall clock filled the room like a hammer. "Salt lick's been gnawed again," he said. "I'll handle it tomorrow," she said softly. He paused mid-bite. "You went out today." She didn't blink. "I check the fence every morning." "You go past it?" "No." He narrowed his eyes. "That so?" She nodded. And for the first time she didn't feel like she was lying. She felt like she was protecting. Later that night, she opened the old cedar chest at the foot of her bed. Inside, her mother's shawl, a leather-bound sketchbook, and a folded newspaper clipping, yellowed with age. The headline read, "Black Hollow Blaze leaves trading post in ashes. Suspicions rise about mixed blood camp." She read the article twice, hands trembling. The word Fisher appeared once, buried halfway down. Austin's father, a known intermediary between tribal horse traders and white ranchers, was believed to have perished in the fire. No bodies were recovered from the scene. Grace closed the chest and stared at her reflection in the dusty mirror. All her life, she'd thought her father's bitterness was born from grief, from losing her mother too soon, from the drought, from the hard soil. But maybe it was born from something uglier, fear, and maybe guilt. The next morning, she returned to the clearing. Austin was waiting. Before he could speak, she said, "They're looking for you." His face didn't change. "I know. My father told the marshal. I figured it'd come to that." She stepped closer. "You have to leave. I've left before. But not like this," she said. "They'll come armed." He studied her face. "And what would you have me do, Grace?" "Hide. Just for now." He gave a small, sad smile. "I've hidden my whole life. Please." He paused, then said gently, "You ever think maybe I stayed so someone would find me?" She couldn't answer. She sat with him in silence for over an hour. Neither spoke of what came next. They just watched the wind ruffle the tall grass. Finally, Austin said, "I don't hate your father. He doesn't deserve that, Grace. Most people don't. That's what makes it Grace." Grace blinked. "Is that how you live? Just forgiving everybody?" "No," he said. "Just not letting their hate live inside me." On her way back, she took a different path, through the dry ravine that curved near the edge of the property. And there, tucked beneath a dead log, she found something odd. A set of hoofprints, faint light. Then a boot print, fresh. She crouched and brushed the dirt gently. Her father's. The track led toward the clearing. That night, she waited until he was asleep. Then she slipped out the back door and followed the path barefoot. It was full moon. The woods glowed silver. She reached the clearing and found it empty. No Austin, no Willow, just a charred bit of rope in the fire pit, and blood, a smear of it on a stone. Still wet. Her breath hitched. Austin? No answer. Willow? Nothing. She turned slowly, heart racing. A sound behind her. She spun. A deer, leaping between trees. She exhaled. But something felt wrong, like the air had been cut, like the forest had closed in. She returned home in darkness. Her hands shook as she latched the barn door. She didn't sleep that night, just lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening for hoofbeats. 2 days passed. No sign of Willow. No sign of Austin. Grace kept her mouth shut, but inside she was splintering. She went about the chores as usual, milking, feeding, stitching the torn grain sack, boiling water for her father's coffee. But it all felt like play acting, like she was moving through a script someone else wrote. On the third day, just before dawn, she left a slice of bread wrapped in cloth and a red apple on the flat stone in the clearing. She didn't stay. She didn't look back, but her fingers lingered on the apple a moment too long. That night, the bread and the apple were gone. In their place, a single feather, long, dark, and threaded with one blue bead at the base. Grace stared at it for a long time. Then, without meaning to, she smiled. The next day, she returned to the clearing and found Austin sitting cross-legged in the grass, his shirt unbuttoned at the chest, skin bruised along one rib. Willow stood behind him, calm as ever. He looked up when he heard her, but didn't rise. "Did they get to you?" she asked softly. "No," he said. "Your father took a shot, missed, but I think he meant it more as a warning than a kill." Grace dropped to her knees beside him and reached for the wound, but he flinched. "Let me see," she said. "I'm fine." "Austin," he let her. She unwrapped a bit of linen from her skirt and dipped it in water from the stream. As she cleaned the bruise, he winced, but didn't pull away. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He looked at her. "You didn't shoot me." He almost did. Austin was quiet. Then he asked, "Why'd you leave food on the stone?" "I didn't know if you were still alive." He gave a small grin. "And bread would fix that?" I didn't say it made sense. They sat beneath the leaning pine tree and shared silence for a while. The kind that feels full, not hollow. Grace watched the sun move through the trees like a ghost on a slow journey. Finally she asked, "Why did you come back?" He glanced at her. "Because you did." Over the next week, their visits changed. Less like hiding, more like returning. Grace brought an old harmonica that belonged to her mother. She didn't know how to play it, not really, but she liked blowing random notes into the trees and pretending the birds answered back. Austin taught her how to braid horsehair into a rope strong enough to hold a mule. She read him poems from memory, stumbling through the hard ones, laughing when she got a line wrong. Once she caught him sketching again. This time it was Willow, mid-stride, mane wild, eyes sharp. He hadn't meant for her to see it, but she sat beside him anyway and said, "That's the first time anyone's drawn her like she's alive. She's more alive than most folks I know." One afternoon, Grace asked him what the blue bead meant. He unbuttoned his shirt slightly and pulled out a thin leather cord with a matching bead strung near the center. "It was my mother's," he said. "She believed blue wards off bad spirits." "She was Comanche?" He nodded. "She taught you?" "Most of what I know." Grace turned the bead in her hand. "Then I think she'd like that you gave it to me." Austin tilted his head. "I think she'd say it was already yours." The weather began to shift. Late summer wind gave way to cooler mornings. The trees whispered differently, as if preparing for something. Grace noticed Austin staring more often, not with hunger, not like the boys in town, but with this quiet ache, like he wanted to memorize her in case something took her away. She didn't ask what he was thinking, 'cause she already knew. She felt it too. One day, as they sat beneath the tall cottonwood tree, he reached over and touched her wrist gently. "Grace," he said. She looked up. "I know this can't last. Not like this," she nodded. "But I want you to know, before anything changes, that these days with you, they've been the first time I haven't felt like a ghost in years." She swallowed hard. "You're not a ghost, Austin. I used to think I died the day they burned that post down. Everyone else did. I just kept walking." Grace put her hand over his. "You came back to life the day Willow found me," she said. He closed his eyes and leaned his forehead against hers. They didn't kiss. Not yet. But the air between them had shifted, like a promise was growing roots just beneath the surface. Later that week, they found a small rabbit caught in a trap not far from the edge of the clearing. Austin freed it, checked its leg, and let it go. "Most men would have kept it," Grace said. Austin looked after the rabbit. "Most men think every pain needs to be turned into something useful." She touched his hand again, deliberately this time. "You're not most men." That night, Grace brought him a tiny bundle wrapped in cotton. Inside, a pressed wildflower and a note that simply read, "In case the ghosts come back." He opened it slowly, looked at her, and didn't say a word, but his hand found hers again and didn't let go. The rumors started in Dustbriar the way wildfires do. Quiet at first, then fast and choking. Someone spotted a figure near the North Ridge, they said. A tall man with Comanche features and a stolen horse. Another claimed tools had gone missing from the Waller barn. A cracked shovel, 2 salt blocks, a bridle. Grace heard the whispers while standing in the general store, her arms full of coffee beans and fabric. Mrs. Biddle leaned close to the grocer and said, "Marshall Dunning says there's an outlaw camped out by the creek. Same one from years back. Fisher blood." The name snapped across Grace's nerves like a whip. She kept her face blank, but her hands gripped the fabric tight enough to wrinkle it. By the time she paid and left, the echo of the town's fear followed her down the main road. That evening, Edgar Ellison sat in the kitchen sharpening his skinning knife. The rhythmic shk of steel on stone had become a sound Grace loathed, not because it frightened her, but because it comforted him. He didn't look up when he said, "You stay close the next few days. Marshall says we ridden out at dawn." Grace stopped pouring water into the basin. "Where to?" "Just a sweep of the woods. Nothing you need to worry about." Her voice stayed calm. "You think someone's out there?" Edgar didn't answer at first. Then, "Don't matter what I think. The town's stirred up. That makes it real enough." She stared at him. "And if it's not just a story?" He looked at her for the first time in days, and in his eyes she saw something she hadn't expected. Guilt. "Then I'll handle it," he said. Grace didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat by the barn with her sketchbook open, drawing Willow from memory, the curve of her neck, the scar on her shoulder, the way her ears tilted when the wind changed. Her hand trembled. She had drawn this same horse dozens of times before. But tonight the lines didn't come easy. They felt like goodbye. At first light, she snuck into the pantry and grabbed what she could. Biscuits, a jar of honey, a wrapped bandage roll. She hid them in her saddlebag and slipped through the orchard while the house still slept. By the time the sun crested the eastern ridge, she was already deep in the woods, her boots dark with morning dew. She didn't find Austin in the clearing. She found Willow, alone, saddled, pacing in slow circles near the edge of the grove. When she saw Grace, the mare stopped and let out a low nicker. Her ears twitched. She seemed agitated. Grace stepped forward. "Where is he?" The mare whinnied, then turned and trotted west, not in a panic, but fast enough to mean follow me. So Grace did. They moved through the woods in silence, girl and horse, deeper than Grace had ever gone, deeper than most folks knew existed. And there, near the ravine that marked the old trading path, she found him. Austin was crouched behind a fallen log, a rifle cradled in his lap, blood soaking through his left sleeve. He didn't startle when he saw her. He just said, "You shouldn't be here." She dropped beside him and opened her bag. "You're bleeding." "Bullet grazed me." "They shot at you?" One of the ranchers. Not sure who. I didn't wait to ask. Grace unwound the bandage. Let me. He nodded, jaw clenched. She pressed the cloth against the wound. You can't stay here. They're coming. I know. They're armed. I know that too. She tied the bandage tight. Then leave. He looked at her, the kind of look that burned. I would've, he said, until I realized if I ran they'd just find someone else to blame. Someone who looks like me, talks like me, doesn't belong. Maybe you don't belong, she whispered, but I do, and I'm still choosing you. He closed his eyes. That afternoon, she rode Willow back to the farm. Alone. No saddle. No reins. Just to be seen. Just to let the town know the horse wasn't missing, wasn't stolen, wasn't anyone's but hers. Her father watched from the porch. He didn't speak, didn't move, but when she dismounted and brushed the mare's neck, she saw his hands tremble. Later that night she heard voices in the front room. The marshal was back. Girl's too soft, he was saying. Maybe even mixed up with him. She's not, her father replied. You sure? A pause. Then Edgar said, she's mine, I'll handle it. Grace didn't sleep. She packed her things after midnight. And by moonrise, she was riding back into the trees, this time not as a girl with questions, but a woman with something to protect. The woods were black with fog when Grace returned to Austin's hiding place. She dismounted Willow and crept quietly through the brush, her hand resting on the mare's neck until the last moment. The wind shifted, and she caught the faintest scent of blood and smoke. Then she saw him. Austin was seated against the trunk of a twisted pine, his rifle resting beside him, his breathing shallow. You came back, he murmured, voice low and rasped. I said I would. She knelt beside him and pulled the second bandage roll from her bag. Let me see. The wound on his arm had bled through. The cloth she'd tied earlier was dark and stiff. She worked gently, biting her lip to keep her hands steady. You don't have to do this, he said. Don't start with that, she whispered. I do, and I will. He didn't argue. Just let her work. When she finished, they sat in silence for a long while. Finally, she asked, Did you know? About what? My father. The fire. The trading post. Austin's jaw tightened. I knew the stories, but I didn't know he was part of it. Grace looked down at her hands. He was. He's not the only one. She looked up. The whole town took from people like me, Austin said. Land. Trust. Names. Then buried it all like it never happened. Then why stay? He turned toward her. Because someone has to remember the truth, and someone has to forgive it. That night they didn't sleep. They built a small fire beneath a rocky ledge, and took turns watching the trail. Grace leaned against Austin's side, her hand in his, her ear against his chest. You smell like pine needles, she whispered. You smell like trouble, he whispered back. She smiled. Just before dawn, hoofbeats broke the silence. She rose first. Then Austin. They could hear voices in the distance, low, angry, armed. They're coming, Grace said. Austin nodded. I won't let them take you. He gave a quiet smile. And I won't let them hurt you. He handed her his rifle. No, she said. You need it. I need you to be safe. Grace took the rifle with shaking hands, but not from fear, from the weight of trust. They ran west, toward the old ravine. The path was narrow, filled with roots and shadow. Behind them the voices grew louder, closer. Then a crack, a rifle shot. Tree bark exploded near Grace's shoulder. She ducked, rolled behind a rock, aimed, and fired once into the air. Not to hit, to slow them. Go, Austin shouted. There's a split path up ahead. They reached it in seconds. 2 trails. One led to the canyon, the other to the river bend. Grace stopped. We split. Austin stared at her. You sure? They won't follow both. He hesitated. She stepped forward and kissed him, quick but full of fire. Then she was gone. The next hour was blur and breath and thunder. Grace rode Willow hard through the ravine, leaping stones, ducking branches, letting the mare do what she was born to do. The sound of riders faded behind her. No shots, no shouts, just wind. And somewhere in the distance, safety. Austin made it to the river bend before sundown. He crouched beneath a willow tree, water trickling nearby, sweat soaking his shirt. He waited and waited, but Grace didn't come. She returned just after dusk. Her skirt was torn, her cheeks scratched, but her eyes were steady. Willow nickered low as she approached, and Austin stood. "You're late," he said. She dropped the rifle in his hands. "I lost your bullet." He caught her before she could fall. They didn't speak that night. They just held each other, like the world might try to take them again, and they weren't going to let it. The next morning, Grace rode into Dustbriar alone, straight to the marshal's office. She walked in, dirt-streaked, eyes burning. "I know who you're looking for," she said. Marshal Dunning raised a brow. "Is that so?" "He's gone," she said. "Gone west. Took nothing. Left no trail. And if you keep pushing, there'll be no peace left in this town. You threatening me, girl?" "No," she said. "I'm warning you." He studied her, then leaned back in his chair. "Town's got a long memory, Grace. Then maybe it's time it started remembering the right things." She left before he could answer, before the weight of history could crawl back up her throat, before fear could catch her, because she wasn't afraid anymore. The morning after her confrontation with Marshal Dunning, Grace returned home to find her father sitting on the porch. He was smoking a pipe, something he hadn't done in years. Didn't look at her when she walked up. Didn't speak either. She stood there for a long moment before saying, "He's gone. He won't come back." Still nothing. "I told them that." Edgar took a long drag, then exhaled smoke toward the trees. "You don't have to lie for me," he said at last. "I didn't," she replied. "I did it for me." Another silence. Then, "You know who he is?" Grace nodded. "Austin Fisher. His father was killed in that fire. The one near Black Hollow." Her father blinked, slow. "I was there." She said nothing. "Just let the truth breathe. I was younger then. Before you were born. There was a deal, trade route, between the post and the tribes. Horses, tools, dried meat. Your mother believed in it. Said it was the future." "She was right," Grace said. Edgar rubbed the side of his face. "People got scared. Said the tribes were playing both sides. That they were hiding weapons. That Fisher's camp was arming for something bigger." "They weren't," Grace said. "No, they weren't." His voice was smaller now. "But fear don't need proof. It just needs a spark." She stepped closer. "You lit it?" He looked at her then, really looked. "I stood back. That was my sin. I stood back and watched." The pipe burned low in his hand. "And I never told your mother." Grace swallowed. "Why?" "Because I knew it would kill the last good part of me." He set the pipe down. "She died not knowing the man she married. Maybe that was mercy." Grace sat beside him, hands folded in her lap. "She saw more in you than you see in yourself," she said. "And you?" Grace looked out toward the woods. "I'm still deciding." Later that day, she returned to the cedar chest. At the very bottom, beneath folded linens and an old dried bouquet, she found something she'd never noticed before. A bundle of letters, wrapped in faded blue ribbon. She opened the first. It was addressed to Eliza Fisher, Austin's mother, written in her mother's hand. "You once told me the land remembers, that roots carry memory beneath the soil. I believe that now. I hope one day our children meet far from this place and freer than we ever were." Grace folded the letter and pressed it to her chest. It smelled faintly of lavender and smoke. That night she read the letter aloud to Austin by the fire. He said nothing. But when it was done, he took the ribbon and tied it around her wrist. "Now the land remembers both of them," he said. Grace nodded. "And so do we." Summer passed into fall without ceremony. The leaves in the orchard turned a deep burnished gold, and the wind grew teeth. Dustbriar quieted down. The townsfolk spoke less about outlaws and more about harvest, snowfall, and their own aches. No one mentioned the Fisher boy again, at least not out loud. Grace moved into the old cabin west of the ravine, the one Austin had built with his own hands long before she ever found Willow. They patched the roof together, fixed the shutter hinges, hung a horseshoe above the door, just slightly crooked. "You sure you want to live out here?" he asked one morning, watching her feed the chickens with her hair tied back and her sleeves rolled. "I didn't follow a horse across half the forest just to go home now." Austin smiled. "So you followed the horse for me?" Grace turned and kissed his cheek. "I followed the horse for the truth. Finding you was just the part I didn't expect." They didn't marry right away. Didn't need to. No preacher. No rings. No papers to sign. They built a new corral instead, made a home with space for breath and silence and firelight, the kind of home where nothing was hidden under the floorboards, not even grief. One morning, Grace stood on the ridge and watched the sun rise through the trees. Willow grazed beside her, belly round. "She's due soon," Grace said. Austin came up behind her, arms folding gently around her waist. "She'll be a good mother." Grace leaned back into his chest. She already was. They stood in silence, just listening to the rustling leaves and the occasional flick of Willow's tail. "I used to think the fence was the thing keeping me safe," Grace said softly. "But now I know it was just the thing keeping me small."